Wes Allen. Welcome to Must Reads, a special episode that we're having sponsored by the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence.
And I'm Alyce McKenzie, co-director of the center with my esteemed colleague Wes Allen, and we're here today to interview John C. Holbert, a good friend to both of us, to Perkins and the center, on the occasion of...
So John is here on campus because he's receiving Distinguished Alumni Award at Perkins.
Yes, right.
So you were here as a student when?
I started in 1968, which is 57 years ago. Things were quite different in 1968 than they are now. Classes were much bigger, many more students. It was the height of the Vietnam War, which means that a lot of people were here for reasons other than going into the ministry. They wanted to get away from Vietnam. I wasn't one of those,
you were.
Although it turns out the next year my draft number was 13, so it turned out to be a very good decision.
Yeah. So what about some memories of your time as a faculty member? What years were you here as a faculty
Well,
member?
what happened was I finished a PhD here in 1975, and then I went to be a pastor for a couple of years in Louisiana. And then I taught at Texas Wesleyan College in Fort Worth for 3 years, and during that time I was asked to come back to fill a couple of sabbatical replacement positions in Old Testament. And so I came back in 1979 to do that. And then for various kinds of reasons they asked me to stay, and so I stayed for a total of 33 years. They couldn't get rid of me, obviously, and I retired in 2012. During my time, I taught Hebrew Bible some of the time, but basically I ended up teaching homiletics, which the last 16 years of my time here, I was in the endowed chair of the Perkins Chair, which now Wes Allen sits in, my former and good colleague.
I remember when I came here to interview in 1999, and of course, you know, you're nervous for an interview, and then I met John Holbert, and I thought, oh my heavens, am I going to need to become John Holbert?
Lower your voice as soon as possible.
But you were very kind to me.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you. Well,
yeah.
you were a very good colleague to have, so I appreciate those years that we had together.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
We did.
I just realized we've all been presidents of the Academy of Homiletics
We have
as
been,
well.
that's
so
correct.
three
Yeah,
of us.
that's right.
We have no power. No one remembers us in that anymore.
No,
but in the
never.
past, things were
Glory
called
days.
upon. Now, so you were
Right.
here for how many years was that? You said
33 total.
33.
79 to 2012.
And so a good 30 of those were spent teaching preaching.
Pretty much, although maybe a bit fewer, 28 perhaps teaching preaching.
So 20,
yeah.
we'll say 28
Yeah.
years
Right.
of intro to preaching, first sermons. How do you remember all that?
Well,
How's that?
I taught introduction 60 times, which yeah.
What is 60 times 12?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
That's the
students,
figure.
that's right.
How many student sermons did I hear? And the answer was probably close to 3,000, I would guess. 2,800 maybe. And twice, because you heard it in class
Yes.
once, then you had to listen to it in your office again. And as I've often said, either this makes you a deeply religious person or it makes you a person with no religion at all. But I should say, and I want to be quite honest about this, I heard some great preaching in those classes, better than I've heard practically anywhere else. And of course there were some others that weren't so great over those 3,000 sermons. So, but I knew that I'll tell you what happened to me when I decided to retire. I had a class arranged for the afternoon from 2 to 5, and I was going to listen to 5 sermons that afternoon. This is toward the end of my time, and I said, you know, I don't think I can do this anymore. I really don't think I can. I did okay when I went, finally, but it somehow became clear to me that my time was over. Now, part of that was because I was getting older. My jokes were stale. I knew nothing about anything else in the world besides what happened in 1965 or something. So my illustrations were not very good anymore. So I knew it was time for somebody else. And so I knew Wes was the right person, but the dean had somebody else in mind for a while, but that didn't work. And so then Wes finally came, and I was very glad for that. Indeed.
Well, you know why you really retired is because you had achieved full sanctification after
Yes,
hearing all those wonderful
right.
sermons.
I was not going on to perfection, as I like to say. I was going on to something else. But that's been 13 years ago, and my retirement's been very good. It's been a very wonderful
You
experience.
and Diana have really had a
My wife and I have had an experience. We've been married 55 years now, and we've joined a church in Los Angeles, which we love, and Diana was on the staff there for a while, and then I do the education, so it's been a good experience to be there. Yeah.
Well, so this is a must-reads interview. You write for us, which we're going to get to in just a second.
Okay.
But you've written a number of books.
I have.
Your specialty has
Yeah.
been the conjunction, if you will,
Yeah,
between Old Testament and
Right.
preaching. What books should we send people out to buy of yours?
I don't know that I would say any of them.
I would.
Yeah. Well, the first book that I wrote was called Preaching Old Testament, and it was an attempt to do what Wes said, and that is to fit together what the Hebrew Bible has to say about the preaching task. It's still the case, as far as I'm aware, that about 75% of all Christian sermons are based squarely in the New Testament only, with vague references sometimes. So my goal is always to help people see something new, how they could use these wonderful materials from the Hebrew Bible. So the first book I wrote, there was that one. I turned in a manuscript that was going to be probably 300 pages long. The book ended up being 120 pages long because they left out a whole lot of it. So then eventually I published all that stuff too in another book called Preaching something. What was it? The Whole Story. So,
Yeah.
Preaching the Whole Story. That's
yes.
right. Which was what
The whole canon is what you were arguing
I was
for.
after
Yes,
something
right.
like that.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
And then another book, Ron Allen and I, a wonderful guy that
Yes.
Wes knows very well and Alice knows well too. He and I wrote a book together called Holy Root, Holy Branches, which was an attempt to understand how the Hebrew Bible relates to the New Testament. And it's a tricky question for preachers particularly.
Now, no one's watching right now. You really had to carry Ron, didn't you? Let's be
Actually, I
honest.
was living in England at the time, and Ron and I, this is before the email was available, so we would shift across the Atlantic with words and phrases. So I would send him a chapter, and he'd send me a chapter, and we'd comment that way, and that's how we wrote the book, essentially.
But Holy
So,
Root,
yeah.
Holy Branches is a
Yeah.
great title and a great book.
Yeah, well,
It is a great
we enjoyed doing that book, and Ron was very helpful. To
Half
me.
of the
Yeah.
book's good, I should say.
That's right.
Half genre, not the half
Yeah,
right.
right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And Job.
Yeah. And Job, yes. I did a dissertation on Job a long time ago, 1975, and I've always loved Job. It's a very strange book, and it has. And then in 1999, when I decided to write a preaching book on Job called Preaching Job, I changed my mind completely. I basically repudiated my old dissertation. In effect, I realized that there was plenty of ways to read Job, and this new way of reading it was better for me. And now, if I were to write another book on that, I'd probably do it differently again. Job is one of those books that it's like a Rorschach test. You bring yourself to it, and suddenly it takes on a different shape and meaning and power to it. So,
Isn't it great
Yeah.
to be paid to
Wonderful.
play in those texts
Absolutely
and get to
wonderful.
write? I mean,
Wonderful.
like our preachers
Spectacular.
and all.
Spectacular.
So what?
Go ahead.
So what about your novel about King
Oh, yeah,
Saul?
King Saul. Well, people often say that when you scratch an academic, you find a novelist in there somewhere. And so I thought, I was an English guy when I was growing up. I wanted to teach English for most of my life. So I thought I would write a novel, or try to anyway. So what I did was, the stories of Saul and David and Samuel to me are among the great stories in the ancient world. So what I did was I just opened the Hebrew text and proceeded to write what I was reading, in effect, filling in gaps. The Bible, of course, is filled with gaps. So I was able to kind of make some sense, I thought, possible sense. So I published this in 2014, and what was intriguing about the reaction to it was many people said to me how helpful it was for their preaching, even though that wasn't
not
my
the
intent at all.
intention.
I was just writing a novel, I thought, in some ways. But the thing about these stories of the Hebrew Bible is that they are intensely rich, but they also can be read in so many different ways that the way I read it was what I would call a kind of hard reading. I made David out to be a very bad character and Samuel even to be worse. And some people found that very troubling. I got some pretty unpleasant commentary from people who were more deeply religious than I am, I guess, and they found that very painful to read about Samuel and that. Samuel's.
But it's also fiction, so you can go
Yeah, do where you want to. Where you
Yes.
go. That's right, exactly. So it was great fun. It meant that you used a different part of your brain. You weren't using your left side so much, but your right side, which is really fun. And I have another novel finished, actually, on David. It's a sequel, obviously, King David. And I'll publish it sometime. I don't know.
Be on the
exactly when
lookout.
yet.
And
Yeah,
he's
it'll
like
come.
the perfect hero. Right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Totally.
I assume you're going to continue with the characterization of him from the first.
Yes, I will,
Yeah.
indeed. I already said a lot about David, of course, in the first story, but
Right.
there'll be more now in the second story.
But we're not giving John enough time to work on that novel because we have him writing for us every week.
Every week,
Indeed.
two blog
Sure,
posts,
that's
one on
right.
the
I do,
Hebrew
I
Scriptures
do.
and one on the New Testament. Every week.
Mhm. Well, the reality,
you.
yeah,
Yes.
you're welcome. Well, the reality is nobody else will do this, and so they
We can't find anybody else who could do it as well.
Oh, yes, how kind you are.
Yeah.
But the reality is
Nobody else who would do this cheaply.
Cheaply, that's right. But I had been writing these kinds of essays for a very long time, really. There was a website that was a big one that went on for a long time
Yes.
that I wrote for them for 4 or 5 years, and then it became problematic in my own mind about which direction they were going, so I dropped that. And so then Alyce and Wes both nicely asked me if I could do a Hebrew Bible one for them, and I said, great, I'm doing it anyway, I might as well go ahead. And then write the New Testament one too. So I'm doing both now each week, and I've just finished up through Pentecost. I did Revelation this time rather than the Gospel, and the Book of Acts, of course, as it always does after during that time. So it really helps me a lot. What I find is about writing, and maybe the two of them may feel the same way, I don't know. But I find when people ask about what's your spiritual life like, and I'm not the kind of person who finds a place in the corner and prays. I've never been able to do that easily at all. My spiritual life revolves around writing. When I sit down to write and read from the biblical text, that's where my connections with God really happen. I mean, they really do. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to do this.
I think for a lot of preachers, sermon preparation
Absolutely,
is
yeah.
their time of spiritual
Absolutely.
formation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
we're very
true.
glad that you can't go over and pray.
We are, because it serves us. You can find John's weekly lectionary posts on our website. We publicize them on our Facebook page. If you're not following us, please do. And we hope
Thank
you
you.
keep writing and keep writing.
Well,
for
as long
us.
as my brain keeps functioning, I'm perfectly glad to do it. That's right. No, it's fun for me. It really is. I enjoy. Now, there's nothing better than I have this little space. My wife and I live in a converted garage, which we call the Garage Mahal, and it's 450 square feet.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's an upstairs part of it. My son is a musician, so he has his studio there. But outside his studio, I have a little space with a desk where my computer is and all that, and whatever books I have left. I gave away 3,000 books when I left here at 2 international seminaries, basically. But I kept various reference books, Anchor Bible Dictionary, and I've got the Hebrew text of various kinds and all that. So I get up there, I work through this stuff, I read the text in the language, and then I began to reflect on what it might mean for me that particular day. And it changes as it does for preachers, of course. So I'm grateful for the chance to do it, really.
Well, we're very
Really.
grateful for
Thank
your
you.
ministry
Thank
of
you.
writing.
Thank
on our
you
behalf.
very much. Thank you.
And thanks for taking time to do this on
Indeed.
your big day. Congratulations again. Well
thank
deserved.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's
Kudos.
a great pleasure for me. That's right. I think they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, but I will take the award anyway.
Well, thank you
Nonetheless.
for joining us. Thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you. Thank you.
We'll be posting more must-reads in the future, but I'm excited to have John in person instead of on Zoom.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
both. Yeah.